Right, we are now recording. So, good morning, everyone. For the records, my name is Giles Walton-Smelly. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Norfolk, and welcome to this quarterly Police and Crime Commissioners Accountability Meeting. I'd like to welcome Chief Constable Paul Sanford and your team. And we have a welcome to for one member of the public who submitted a question. Good to see you. Sorry. Looking over the heads, good to see you again. Thank you for supporting the occasion. This is a hybrid meeting being held in public at the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner here at Windham, and also virtually on Microsoft Teams. And this meeting is the vehicle I use to exercise my statutory responsibility to hold the Chief Constable to account for the policing service being provided to Norfolk. And I do that as the public's elected representative. And I do that against the priorities set out in my police and crime plan and the associated budgets. I'll run through the usual sort of housekeeping notes. As you know, the meeting's being recorded. It's not being live streamed, but the recording will be available on YouTube. That's usually within about 24 hours, sometimes a bit quicker. For those attending by Teams, we've got a couple on the screen, just one on the screen, actually. Morning, Nicola. And I ask you, as usual, to mute microphones unless you're speaking, and similarly in the room, if you can mute laptop speakers so we can prevent feedback and external noise. We're not expecting a fire alarm test, so if the alarm does go off, we must evacuate. For our visitor, hopefully you've been told where the bathrooms are, but they're out on the hall. You will need a pass card to get in and out of the office, so please let us know if you're going out. And my plan is to run for an hour, pause for a comfort break at about 11 o'clock, or at the end of item 6, depending on how we're going, followed by a second hour commencing at 11:15. And obviously I'll vary that subject to progress. So, swiftly on. Item 1, apologies. Chief, you seem to have a full team today. Is there anyone giving apologies?
Just Julie Dean, who's got commitments.
Understood, thank you. And from my team, we're just missing Gavin Thompson. Item 2, declarations of personal and or prejudicial interest. Does anyone have any to raise? I see no hands are going up. No declarations, thank you. Item 3 then, the minutes of the last meeting, which was held here on the 5th of July 2023. The minutes begin on page 3 of today's papers. First of all, any issues that anyone wants to raise over accuracy? Grant? So there were no actions to be carried forward, if I've got that right. But I've got 2 questions I'll raise in a moment. But before I get to those, we can tend to accept the minutes as a fair and accurate record of the meeting. Not all round, thank you. So my first question does arise from the minutes. We spent a lot of time looking at the hit and run incidents that took place on the 5th of March 2021. Chief, is there any update you want to offer about progress since the last plan?
So just a limited update, Commissioner. Today there is the misconduct meeting involving the police officer who was in the car but not the driver. Also the front seat passenger of the car. So that's taking place at headquarters today. Probably important to say that you'll be aware that there was an IOPC review of this matter. One of the things that the IOPC looked at was whether the misconduct meeting was the appropriate level of response for the alleged behaviours, and the IOPC determined that it was. So it has not gone to a misconduct hearing, which is the more serious tier. It's gone to a misconduct meeting following the IOPC's recommendations. Obviously, we'll have to wait to see the outcome of that meeting, and that will be made public later on today. With regards to the driver, we are trying to set a date for a misconduct hearing for the driver. You'll be aware that there are challenges with regards to both sourcing legally qualified chairs at the moment, because they are meetings that are chaired by independent persons, not by chief officers. There are also challenges at the moment sourcing appropriate barristers, and that's the particular issue with this case, just given the volume of misconduct meetings taking place nationally. But perhaps there are not as many barristers as we would wish, but we are trying to get that meeting set as soon as possible. That's probably all that would be appropriate for me to say at the moment, bearing in mind in the case of both officers, they're working their way through their different processes.
No, thank you for that. And I'm not going to ask any more questions because I certainly wouldn't wish to interfere or prejudice the disciplinary process in progress. My second question relates to a separate issue that became public after the last panel. So it's not a matter arising from the minutes, but it seems appropriate to take it now. And that's about the data breach. Did you want to make a statement about that issue, and particularly about the progress in informing those involved?
Yes. This concerns the release of FOI data that had hidden within some spreadsheets that were released, and hidden is the key word, some personal sensitive data. It still remains the case that we have no evidence that anyone has accessed that data who should not have done so. But when we publicly announced this issue, we undertook to update all of the victims who may have had their information released by the end of September. We were able to do that, and that process is complete. There, as you would expect, there were a small number of victims who we've been unable to track down, potentially because they've moved address, changed phone numbers, etc. And after exhaustive inquiries, we've stopped in our attempts to locate them. That being said, any member of the public who has concerns that they may have been impacted by it still contact us, and we can confirm or not whether that is the case. But the main progress to note is that we've honoured our commitment to contacting everybody, hopefully provided them with the reassurance that they need, and have complied with all of the wishes of the RCO, who we've made in close contact with as we work our way through this situation.
When you say small number of victims, you put a number to that?
Yes, and I just need to try and dig that number out, but we were contacting over 1,000. Perhaps I can just come back to that figure in a couple of moments' time, and I'll just read it from my inbox, which I'm struggling to see it at the moment. Do something. Right, so we undertook the process of notifying just over 1,200 people. As said, that was completed by the 30th of September. The total number who have either not engaged, i.e. once we've sent them an email to their previous email address and had a response, or were uncontactable is 168. But important to say that amongst some of them, they could have received information that just chosen not to acknowledge it, and how that 168 breaks down, we don't know. 168 is the answer.
No, thank you for that. And obviously, if any of them come forward, then they'll be picked up.
Absolutely. In the meantime,
in a normal way.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've got nothing else on minutes from the last meeting or sort of supplementary questions. Any other thoughts from the floor? Nothing on the board. Let's move on then to item 4. Chief, your team may be aware through the conversations I've had with Ralph in his office, but I thought it'd be useful in these meetings, given that money is the fuel that drives policing and the capabilities you can offer, that we actually included a financial statement And so item 4 is the financial statement. And I'm assuming I'm looking at Peter to update us on where we're at with the money question.
Yeah, if you, Peter, I might just give some follow-up comments at the end.
Thank you.
Peter.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Commissioner. So in the Pillar 1 report that accompanied the papers, it outlines that at the end of June, we were forecasting an overspend of £1.2 million for the constabulary. For context, that's 0.6% of the constabulary budget. So it's less than 1%, but still a significant amount nonetheless. Just in terms of why we're forecasting that level of overspend. So in terms of the pressures on pay, we've had partially funded pay awards for the last 2 years with pay settlements that were significantly higher than we planned within the term of financial plans because of the inflationary pressures that are within the economy, which everyone would be aware of. So last year we had a 5% increase. This year we've had a 7% increase for officers and staff. And as said, this is only partially funded through home settlements. So that cumulative pressure has built up and impacted on the overspend significantly. In addition, on pay, because of the levels of demand for our services for communities, there is also pressure on overtime budgets and forecasting an overspend there. If we pick up then spending on non-pay items, again, because of record levels of inflation that have been sustained for higher periods of time than when we were planning for and anticipated planning in the NCFP phase, we're seeing significant pressure on contractual spending, particularly around estates and ICT contracts, and above the level that we provide for within the medium-term financial plan. And within the medium-term financial plan, the plan for more inflation than we've ever provided before. So that sustained record level of inflation is having a significant impact. In terms of the steps that we're taking to address the 1.2 million overspend, there are 4 steps that we put in place. One is by putting some restrictions around managing our vacancies. So the threshold for filling those vacancies has been raised, and vacancies have to be approved by the respective chief officer that oversees that portfolio. We're looking to control discretionary spend, so trying to limit the spending that we're making on non-pay to those that we're already contractually committed to make or that are critical to service. We've been reviewing the capital programme for the in-year spend on the capital, again to see if there's any items that we could stop or defer to next year. And the final step that we're taking is to try and maximise the income streams that are available to the constabulary in order to help mitigate that spend. So in summary, that 1.2 million, which again for context, 0.6% of our overall budget, is really driven by those sustained record levels of inflation, the impact on non-pay, but also the impact on the pay settlements that have been negotiated for police officers and police staff. That will, of course, have an impact on next financial year as well, because if we've got an overspend that rolls into 24-25, that will just add to the pressure that we're already aware of that exists for 24-25, again, with restricted levels of funding from the Home Office. And some of the mitigations that we'll put in place will be able to reduce some of that pressure as it goes into 24-25. But some of those mitigations will be one-off in terms of some extra income in certain areas, deferring effectively recruitment vacancies for a period of time, deferring capital spend again at some point that will catch up, and that will be a pressure in next year. But Commissioner, those are the steps that we're taking at the moment, and I'm open to any questions around, so the Chief may want to make some additional comments.
Come on in first. And then
Thank you. I mean, I'll be brief. I think Peter's given a very good overview. We've got in-year challenges, which are a concern, but I'm confident we will address. The challenges for next year look particularly problematic. There's two aspects to this. There's the balancing the budget element that Peter refers to, but of course there are areas of our organisation where ideally we'd want to invest and grow to help address increasing demand. The control room is a particular area of concern for me. We continue to see year on year increases in 999 calls, and those calls need to be answered, and the resultant jobs need to be deployed to. Our capacity to keep up with growing demand next year, and the challenge as it will be to balance the budgets. I do consider us to be an incredibly lean organisation. You'll be very aware of the challenge of so much of our budget being locked down, whether that be associated with police officer pay. I can't reduce the number of police officers because I would receive less funding from the government, and because of contractual arrangements that we have in place where we have contracts for services for a number of years. We can't but honour those contracts. So the actual wiggle room in our budget to be able to make the savings required is incredibly limited. This is not a situation unique to Norfolk and Snapbury. It's being felt by every Snapbury up and down the county. And appreciate you know this, but because it's a public meeting, and I know others may well be listening in, it will not be until probably early in the next calendar year before we've got a true sense of what all of our allocations will be, whether that be through precept, whether that be through government grant, and indeed a true sense of what some of the other cost pressures coming over the horizons are. So quite a bit of uncertainty, significant financial challenge. We've always met the financial challenge before, and I'm sure we will again, but to reiterate, balancing the budget is not easy, but it's probably the easier bit. Maintaining the sort of service that we would want with that reduced budget is the real challenge.
I've got two quick questions, I think. First one, probably for Peter. You're quite careful not to put a figure on the amounts that this year's overspend might roll over. Are you willing to speculate? Are we looking at, say, 50% of it, all of it, none of it?
It's difficult to tell at the moment and give you a precise figure. I mean, clearly we do monthly monitoring, and we report the update to the Chief Finance Officer and through GSL. The pressures are increasing, if anything, around the inflationary aspects, particularly when contracts come up for renewal. Those inflation pressures still probably higher than the headline rate of inflation, particularly around ICT contracts. It's uncertain around the utilities spending forecasting at the moment, and again because that's really quite volatile. So when we refresh those figures, they're tending to stay around that same £1.2 billion forecast at the moment. There are some income streams that we're looking to tap into that may mitigate that. It's difficult to put a figure on it, but I think that £1 million part, anything between £500,000 and £1 million, is probably going to roll to next year.
But the key message there is we're not going to be able to mitigate the whole of that overspend in year.
It will be a challenge because of so much of it being related to pay, as the Chief was talking about. Officer pay in particular, we can't do anything about. 88% of our net revenue budget is on pay, and then we've got those contractual items that we have committed to, and we need those services to support the critical work of the front line. And as I said, the inflation pressures that are coming through those contracts is tending to be above the headline rate.
Chief, I can turn to you for the second one. We talked about vacancies as a means of mitigation. What are the potential operational penalties?
Well, there are operational penalties. Much of it much of it depends on where the posts fall. So where posts are absolutely operationally critical, we are going straight out to market for them because we've got to keep a show on the roads. It's the Deputy Chief Constable that assesses each vacancy now before it goes out for advert. Because most of the vacancies are come as a result of either retirement or individuals moving on to new jobs, they're quite more spread around the organisation. So what we're managing to avoid is one particular department facing a disproportionate impact of this. But ultimately, if the posts weren't required, we would just remove the posts. But we're not doing that. And vacancy management is, to be honest, quite an unsophisticated but effective method of just buying ourselves some headroom. And if for every post in the organisation there's a 2, 3, 4 week delay before that post gets filled, multiply that up across the number of posts and you do deliver a saving. But of course, what we're asking what we're asking our colleagues to do in the meantime is pick up the slack. They are all busy. So there will be operational impact. In everything that we do, we particularly prioritise what we call core services. So they're the services that the public just expect us to do well, which is answering the phone, getting to jobs quickly, keeping victims up to date, investigating crime well. And we will try to make sure that the vacancies aren't in and around those areas, but it is a challenge. And to reiterate what I said earlier, there are some departments in the organisation that with strong justification I would wish to grow. And I particularly talk about the control room and the need to answer calls. And right at the back end, I would particularly focus on victim and witness care because of the backlogs in the criminal justice system, which is a problem that continues to cause us concern. So we are managing it. I'd like to reassure you that we're managing it, but it does come with its challenges.
But I think it's fair to say most of the visible side of that penalty is actually visible to your staff rather than to the general public.
It is, and to reiterate, we cannot reduce the number of police officers that we have. So as soon as a police officer is leaving, we're bringing in a new recruit. Now, of course, they have their training and their abstraction, but our number of police officers are as high as they have been for a long time. But police officers are most productive when they have a support team behind them that takes away the admin, the bureaucracy, so it's not without consequence. And in some circumstances, we are deploying police officers where you could legitimately employ member of police staff to do the role, such as the challenges with our budget. But to reiterate, we are keeping the show on the road. All of the metrics, and many of them will go through in the papers today, demonstrate that the constabulary is performing well when it comes to crime reduction, when it comes to crime detection, when it comes to satisfaction and confidence. So we're pleased with our performance. We're maintaining it whilst we're managing those budgetary pressures, but there's from a financial planning perspective, there's a fair amount of uncertainty about next year.
Understood. Thank you for that. Any other points on that agenda item? Okay, we'll move on then to item 5, questions from the public. I think we received 4 questions and we accepted all 4. At least we accepted in part all 4. The first question comes from the member of the public who's present with us. The question was in 2 parts, and the first part related to pavement parking in a specified part of Norwich, and that was passed to the constabulary for action by the big manager concerned. So given that I'm working at the strategic level, I wasn't going to delve into that specific issue. But the second part is as follows. Why is there no definition of obstructive pavement parking and no standardised reporting format for obstructive pavement parking available from Norfolk Police as common elsewhere in England? If reported, would Norfolk Police take action against such obstructions?
Okay, well, I'll take those two bits in order, and thank you for the question. To the first point, most police forces now in the country have moved on to a common website called Single Online Home. If you typed in, I don't know, Warwickshire Police, the website would have Warwickshire Police branding on it, but it would be exactly the same website as Cheshire Constabulary. And what that means is there's commonality between all of those services. Norfolk and Suffolk Constabularies are one of the last forces to merge on to Single Online Home. There were some contractual reasons associated with our current website provider that made that the case. But at the start of November, we are moving across to this national website platform, Single Online Home. It will be, as said, Norfolk Constabulary branded, and on there, there is a standardised national approach to the reporting of nuisance parking and abandoned vehicles. So that will see the constabulary adopt the national agreed content for advice and reporting. So I hope, well, I know that will remove that issue. I'm looking to my right now. I think our go live date's the 1st of November for the full switch on.
It comes in a number of phases, so I'm not absolutely sure that the first is all of the phases going together. This is an established process that the national team operate on, and we'll move through bits that come online. But things like the nuisance parking and abandoned vehicles will be in a relatively early acceptance of absorption into our own system, and it has a full list of things. It's just
So an acknowledgement that we have been out of sync with the rest of the country. We haven't had that standardised arrangement, but when the website switches on in November, we will gradually morph across to have that provision there. If you were to look on our website now, there is a pink banner on the top, which gives a bit of a glimpse as to what the new website is going to look like. It's not populated yet, it can't be used yet, but that is on there just to give a bit of an idea as to what that looks like. So I apologise that we have not been applying the standard national content, but that is being remedied. So the second part of the question effectively asks, if I reported it, what would Norfolk Constabulary then do? And this is a topic that has previously been raised at PAMS. I think we discussed it back in April.
we did, yes.
So a bit of history. In 2011, I believe it was, the law was changed to place responsibility for general enforcement of parking offences onto local councils, and we no longer have powers under the Highway Act or Road Traffic Act to deal with vehicles of that nature. We do, though, have some powers if those vehicles are causing a hazard or willful obstruction of the highway. And in areas such as Norwich, where there are narrow streets, densely packed housing, and an ever-growing number of vehicles on our roads, sadly, we too often see that vehicles can be parked or abandoned, causing dangerous obstruction. And I'd particularly be concerned for wheelchair users or those people using pushchairs when that is the case. Yes, through the new website that can be reported, or alternatively to a officer in person or through to email to local safer neighbourhood teams. When those matters are reported to us, we do assess them based on the individual circumstances of each case, and obviously what resources we've got available to ourselves according to what else is going on in the city at the time. But if we can deploy to such instances, we will. Commissioner, I know you made mention to the local safer neighbourhood team being aware of these matters as well. And I know that there has been dialogue with one of the town councillors in the city, Councillor Colbert, who has been in discussion with two of our neighbourhood inspectors in around the city. Indeed, has been out and inspected some of the streets around the Wensum ward area where it's been particularly problematic. I'm told that over the weekend just gone, the Safer Neighbourhood team were planning to be out providing letter drops into areas to try and encourage more responsible parking. But I am realistic as to how successful that will be. But I think from a problem solving perspective, the first part is to inform the public as to the impact of what is taking place and to ask residents to be as responsible as possible. We wait to see what the impact of that will be, but thereafter, if there are enforcement powers available to us, and when appropriate, we will seek to use those powers, as said, just set against the other demands that we might have at that time that we might need to deploy to. But I just conclude by noting that I can understand why this must be a significant frustration for people living in that area, and particularly, as said, for those who may be disabled, may be elderly, may be trying to push children or just want to keep our roads and streets safe.
Thank you. Moving swiftly on, I'm mindful of time. Second question, under the heading of crime prevention and detection, why is there no facility for members of the public to give confidential and/or sensitive information to the police? The control room call handlers do not provide any system for confidential reporting.
So should someone ring up our control room, we prefer them to leave their contact details, but they don't need to. So if someone wanted to speak to us without leaving their name, they could. Of course, we also have a live chat facility now as well, where again, that can be done anonymously. We promote Crime Stoppers, which is a fantastic means of people providing anonymous information on crime and incidents. And in the very near future, Crime Stoppers is also going to be rolling out an additional number where the behaviours of police officers can be reported anonymously, or just through through a route other than reporting them directly to the police. So I think those services are there and are available.
Okay, thank you. Third question. Questioner would like a review of stop and search policy that the police should implement. Questioner goes on, I would also like to see a clear policy on the use of police body cams. I would propose that all police officers should be obliged to switch on their body cams whenever they are dealing with the public. There should be enforceable sanctions taken against officers who fail to comply with this requirement. May I ask you to describe the regulation process and scrutiny that is in place? Now, my impression is that a lot of that is already in place.
It is. So if I take stop and search first, we do have a policy on stop and search. It's been reviewed as recently as April of this year. It is based upon the College of Policing's approved professional practice, and it is rigorously inspected by the Inspectorate of Constabulary. We do our own internal audits of our stop search compliance. We are now seeing incredibly high levels of compliance with that approved professional practice. And here's the link to body worn video. We are also reviewing the body worn video of the stop and search encounters to make sure that it's not only the form that's correct, but that the stop and search is carried out in an appropriate manner. We have a stop and search scrutiny group, so external lay members of the public who review that body worn video as well. And that's something that Nick has established and is starting to work really well. Importantly, we try to make sure that that group, the composition of that group, is made up of a diverse range of local residents. So from stop and search, I'm very content that we are compliant. It does remain a powerful tool for us when it comes to the prevention and detection of crime. With regards to body worn video, again, we have policy in place. The most recent version was published in September 2022. And again, that is built upon College of Policing approved professional practice. The policy includes details of when a police officer should be turning on their body worn video, and also provides details of how that footage should then be retained or not, depending upon circumstances. That policy is clear that when an officer searches an individual or a vehicle, the body worn video should be on. And if officers fail to follow that policy, then they may well be subject to disciplinary action, or certainly as a minimum managerial intervention to make sure that they do in the future. We have, as I said, robust audit and scrutiny in place for both stop and search and how our body-worn video is used.
Yeah, thank you for that. The reports that come back to me from the scrutiny panel via the Independent Advisory Group have been very positive since that was launched.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it's an area that we've needed to tighten up. It was identified by the Inspector of Constabulary when they were last with us a couple of years ago, and that has given us a real focus to sort it out, and I'm very pleased with where we are.
Good, thank you. Last question from the public. I would like to know how Norfolk Constabulary is tackling scams in all their various forms. This individual has been the victim of a cryptocurrency scam, and now, thanks to Duncan Baker, his case is being investigated. But the initial submission to Action Fraud was not processed. Scamming is of epidemic proportions and needs to be a priority.
Yes, it's scamming, fraud. Certainly, according to the British Crime Survey, it's the most prevalent crime in the UK now. It's particularly challenging for police forces in so much as the volume is high. The perpetrators often don't live in our country, let alone our county, and some of the countries that these offenders live in are perhaps hard to work with to secure criminal outcomes or to secure justice. So there is a real difficulty, and therefore our response needs to be multifaceted, because we have to be realistic as to how much of that overseas criminality we can stop, and we put a significant focus with our partners on prevention. Because it is common when you review cases of this nature that there is significant opportunity for the events not to have taken place in the first instance. The Constabulary is a member of the Norfolk Against Scams Partnership. That's a partnership led by Norfolk Trading Standards. It works with the Constabulary and other partners to protect individuals and businesses from scams, doorstep crime, fraud, by raising awareness, delivering prevention messages, protection activity. So we're an active participant in that partnership. Our corporate comms team are regularly publishing scam prevention messages through our social media channels, through local media, and our beat managers are reinforcing that. Of course, we know that sadly the target group of victims for scams is often the elderly and vulnerable, and for that reason we have established a process whereby when we see the referrals coming back from Action Fraud, we're assessing them for vulnerability and going out and providing bespoke crime prevention advice for people that we believe are at risk of repeat victimisation. There's a significant amount of repeat victimisation when it comes to this activity. At a national level, the police's response to fraud is coordinated by City of London Police. They run a whole calendar of campaigns targeting particular types of fraud. We've been active participants in the last year on operations involving courier fraud. So that is the sort of the phone call that someone receives asking them to withdraw their money from a bank, and then someone comes and collects the money, and they never see that money again. And also romance fraud, which again has increased in its prevalence across the UK. Earlier this year, the government published a new fraud strategy, which I think we discussed around this table as well. That fraud strategy with particular emphasis on regulators, industry, charity and law enforcement working together to pursue fraudsters, block fraud and empower people. The strategy highlights that there was an estimated 3.7 million incidents of fraud in England and Wales last calendar year. That's the scale of it. So I think the epidemic is
fitting description.
Very fitting. Part of that strategy announced a review of Action Fraud. So that's going to be completely recasted to try and make it more effective. We don't have influence over the screening decisions that are made by Action Fraud, but we take action in all of the cases that are sent back out to us. Finally, we do have our own joint force cyber investigations team. They pick up the most complex frauds which are cyber dependent, and we are also at the moment, money permitting, looking at the implementation of a fraud assessment unit ourselves for our own fraud specialists into. With these figures, clearly that's an area I'd like to grow the organisation in. I go back to our earlier discussion about finance, and we just need to understand what next year brings before we see if we can upscale our activity in this area.
Thank you. I think the review into Action Fraud will be helpful. When I've used it, you press send on your report to Action Fraud, and almost before you've taken your finger off the send button, you've had a computer generated response. And of course, you hear nothing forward. So I can understand why the questioner is concerned that reporting to Action Fraud didn't generate. Of course, they collect the information and do other things with it. That's not visible to the people that use it. So
yeah, and I think that visibility is perhaps one of the failings, in as much as having a central place for the coordination of fraud, given that it crosses all boundaries, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So much of the information that's created by the City of London Police will go through into the national law enforcement partners and seek to deal with the upstream origins of the offence. But too often we're peddling beneath the water and the victim's not seeing the activity above the surface. So I think it's certainly an area where we could better explain the effect that we have. I mean, such is the industrial nature of some of the offending. You could take out one person in an overseas territory and cut thousands of offending opportunities with just one individual. And that's the level that City of London Police, NCA, our regional crime units are operating at.
yeah, thanks for that. I'm mindful of time, so we'll keep rolling along. I'm assuming there are no other points on questions from the public. So let's get straight into item 6. And as I've done before, I'm going to go through the pillars, but I'm going to take pillar 2, visible and trusted policing, first. The report on this begins on page 25 of the papers. I declared pillar 2, visible and trusted policing, to be the main effort of my scrutiny. So what I thought I'd do this time is to do a bit of a deep dive into this pillar. And I thought I'd start on a sort of philosophical note, if I may. I mean, we talk a lot about visible policing. We use the buzz phrase a lot. But I just thought we might begin by defining what we mean, because it's my understanding of the term, the same as yours, is the same as the public's. So what do you regard as visible policing to be?
Well, I think it takes many forms. The most obvious one is we accept that the public have always wanted and will continue to always want to see a police officer on the streets in their uniform.
What I rudely call Dixon and Dock Green policing.
Yes. And look, it continues and will always have value. But I don't limit my definition of visible policing to that. My definition of visible policing extends to the public having visibility of what we're doing, visibility of our actions. I think that you can be just as reassured from receiving some communication to tell you what the police have done in your village, in your street, in your town in the last 24 hours, is actually seeing that police officer on the street acting. And that's particularly the case now, given that so much of police activity involves matters which happen behind closed doors, involves investigations that by necessity, so for example, when you're talking about cybercrime and fraud, by necessity, you have to be sat in a police station investigating that because you need one of these things in front of you to get to the bottom of it. But it's very important that we are visible and clear with the public as to what we've been doing so that they know what value they're getting for the contribution they make to policing. So visible for me, yes, it's about the sort of dot green officer with big hat on, but it's about improving our communications, improving our messaging, improving our feedback and our updating to community so that they are clear as to what we have been, what we haven't been able to do in their.
And is that achievable, given we're such a large county, predominantly rural, is that achievable in the rural areas to the same degree as in the other?
It's more of a challenge, as you know, fifth largest county in the country. So we cannot be everywhere all of the time. There are many parts of the county where I would like to be able to deploy more officers for that street presence. But you and I, earlier this month, I think it was this month, we were at the North Walsham speeding meeting.
That's right, yes.
And one of the things that struck me most about that meeting, there must have been about 140 people present in the room, all who came along because they were concerned about speeding on Norfolk's rural roads. And I was glad that at the outset, you and I both had the opportunity to address the room before we got to questions. And you could see the astonishment in the room when I went through the statistics about the amount of enforcement activity that we had taken place in their neighbours. My takeaway from that meeting was the value of passing that information, because we do so much more than everyday people know. And that's the case in rural areas as much as it is urban areas. But no, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to keep officers' boots on the ground. It's particularly challenging when so much of the demand coming into our control room does not relate to crime anymore. It relates to dealing with crisis and dealing with mental health. And every time we deal with those additional demands that don't relate to crime or social behaviour, we are abstracted from our core mission. That you will know that we have plans in January to commence the Right Care, Right Person approach that is being actively used in a number of forces across the country now, whereby we will be taking a different approach to mental health demand. I hope, I strongly anticipate that will free up a number of hours to help us reinvest into visible policing. We also anticipate that later this month, the Home Office will announce the findings from their review of productivity in policing. That will make a number of other observations, such as how changing of crime recording rules could free up tens of thousands of officer hours, how changes to disclosure rules would also free up tens of thousands of hours. I hope that the recommendations in that productivity review are all accepted, because if they are, that would be a good shot in the arm of visible policing.
You referred to challenges, and I take what you say about Right Care, Right Person and the productivity review, but I'm mindful of the demand of 999 as one example currently in the county. What other barriers, obstacles are there in delivering high levels of visible policing? I mean, are we maintaining the numbers of officers on the ground that we would like to maintain, or are they being distracted? Distracted is a bad term.
Yes,
but,
yeah, I was going to answer and then distracted made me pause, Commissioner.
Yeah. So it's my bad language.
No.
It's operational demand rather than distraction.
Yes. Well, actually, it's not necessarily operational demand that is the issue. In addition to growth in calls related to mental health and crisis, what we are really seeing now is the impact of regulation and statutory requirements on policing. And the impact that has is both on training and on how long it takes to carry out a certain unit task. So you'll be aware that all police officers now join under the Police Education and Qualifications Framework. The impact of that is that 3 or 4 years ago, a police officer would have been in training for about 10 weeks, then they'd been out on the streets of a tutor and then pretty much fully deployed. And during the next 2 years, they would have had about 4 or 5 weeks worth of abstraction, but other than that, they were deployable. Under the new regulations, police officers are spending much more time in the classroom. Much of that is a benefit, which is why I pause, because as crime becomes more complex, as a society which we police becomes more complex, you need to better train and better invest in your staff. But that does come as a consequence of visibility. You all know that Norfolk Constabulary was allowed to grow its police officer numbers by 224 as a result of the government's uplift plan. We have a figure, and it's quite an imprecise figure. I'm looking a little bit towards Ralph, that when we were first evaluating the consequences of PQF, we were suggesting that somewhere between 70 and 80 of those officers would be accounted for by training, that 224 growth. So that's the sort of impact that training has on us. We are also, it was also to be a common trend that when things go significantly wrong in policing, appropriately, policing seeks to learn the lessons and put in place the measures that will stop things occurring again. But every time we do that, one of the solutions appears to be more training. So again, in the last 2 years, we've seen an increase in the amount of time that police officers have to undertake personal safety training. We've seen an increase in the amount of hours that officers have to spend undertaking taser training. The firearms curriculum seems to grow every year. I think we're now up to 21 days of training for firearms officers every year. As a result of recommendations coming out of the Manchester Arena inquiry, first aid training has increased in terms of the number of hours. Commissioner, the list goes on. And of course, I want, and the public would expect, a professional, highly skilled workforce. Perhaps my frustration is that every time one of these recommendations is made, they are never costed. I'm yet to see it costed once, and I'm yet to see the impact and visibility appropriately set out. And so my message would always be, of course, let's expect that standard, but equally you get what you pay for. And that additional training burden does prevent me addressing some of the issues that we discussed in this meeting this morning. And it's not just uniform officers as well. If I look at forensics, for example, the forensic science regulator sets out a very detailed code of compliance that we now have to adhere to. Appropriately so, because we absolutely do not want miscarriages of justice when it comes to the collection of evidence. But the consequence of that is that my forensics teams are effectively now working in laboratory-type environments. And the number of scenes that one of my forensics teams can go to now in a day is significantly lower than when I started my service, probably about half the capacity. Again, all for good reason, but there was a cumulative impact of regulations and compliance that I think is probably starting to bite policing, and needs to be better understood when these regulations and approved practice is made.
Yeah, there's a real tension there, because of course the public, when they see an officer in blue or even a detective in civilian clothes, expect the perfect solution, they expect a Wizard of Solomon effect to go that way. But with a force, third of which has less than 3 years service, and with constant training demands, there is this tension between visible policing and producing the perfect figure that gets it right every single time.
Yes.
And woe betide the police officer that gets it wrong well.
Yeah, and I would reflect that, particularly as a consequence of the savings that we've had to make over the last 10 years, up and down the country have probably cut back too hard in the training and development departments. So some of this increase is necessary. And again, I repeat, particularly as the world of policing gets more complex, you do want I want a highly skilled, fully trained police officer coming to my door if I find myself requiring their services. but it does come at the cost of visibility.
But you also need a training margin in your establishment.
Yes, you do.
Because the other side that we haven't commented on is that in 2010, we had 281 police community support officers. And although you gave us the numbers of the police uplift programme, we haven't actually got back up to the 2010 aggregated number of officers and PCSOs, if my maths is right.
Oh, I would have to double check the maths on that.
I do think because money was reinvested, and there was an uplift in police officers from prior to uplift, and we're actually ahead now in terms of overall.
So total numbers are back up to where they were or
So broadly, it was just south of 100, I would suggest. On police officer number that came in as a result of that operating model change, and then uplift occurred after that. I think there was possibly a preset rise that's had a handful then additional police officers, so the numbers will be higher.
So I think 87 were added in 2017 as part of Norfolk 2020. So
Yes, yeah, and
a big
preset
trade-off.
got us towards about 100. I think maybe one more precepts occasional one financial year prior to uplift being announced.
Yeah.
So I do think our aggregate is higher.
Albeit, Commissioner, I suspect we adjusted per head of population. Then we would not, it would not be as positive.
Yeah, it is a thin blue line.
Yeah.
We've touched on the next one to a degree. How has the Officer Uplift Programme contributed towards effective visible policing within Norfolk? And then second part, what is the Constabulary's plan going forward with regard to retention?
So in terms of effectiveness, I mean, as I said earlier in the meeting, I believe the Constabulary is performing incredibly well. We find ourselves in a position where we are every month we are jockeying with Cheshire Constabulary to be the force that's detecting the most crimes in the country. But we are seeing gains in the number of detections that we're delivering every month. On Thursday, the Office of National Statistics will publish the most recent quarterly crime performance data. We are anticipating that data will show between 5 and 6% reduction in crime. There are certain crime types where there are challenges, shoplifting in particular, which I think is being nationally reported, but we're seeing good reductions in crime. And then, as set out in page 26 of your pack, Commissioner, when it comes to confidence, which is one of the main measures under this pillar, the returns from the most recent British Crime Survey were incredibly encouraging. It was seen as Solwys ranked best in the country when it came to confidence when the public were asked to assess overall how good a job we are doing. And that is set against a trend of reductions elsewhere in the country. Not surprising reductions given some of the very difficult headlines that policing has had over the last couple of years. In many respects, the operational part of policing is the area where I'm most content. I always want more, of course I do. It's some of the more organisational and financial matters that are causing a particular challenge. But in terms of the effectiveness of our offering, then we are in a good place. You asked about retention as well. So we are seeing decent retention rates when it comes to new officers. I think that the most recent pay increase has been helpful. We are still in the early days of uplift. So many of the student officers who have joined us are midway through their study element of their journey within policing. At the end of it, they will come out with a degree in policing, and I think that we will have to look very closely to see how they then decide to use that qualification once they've obtained it. Of course, people do leave the profession. Sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes we have very sensible, mature discussions with officers. If they with new officers. They find that it's not the right career for them after experiencing it for a little while. It's in both of our interests if they do something else, but that is the minority. We see good retention, but we are not complacent. How do we prevent further losses? By having a strong well-being service to support our officers when they deal with the difficult things that they deal with, by investing in them to make sure that their training is good, as was mentioned before, and that they do feel supported. We've changed the ratios of supervision because with that younger workforce, you need more active and involved supervision. So we're making investments, particularly in the inspecting ranks across the constabulary, so that our officers feel best supported. I think leadership is key to this. From my position all the way down, visible, active leadership, so showing people that people are supported to ensure that standards are high. And then finally, it's important that we invest in these individuals by making sure that they're working fit for purpose offices with the right kit, with the right equipment, the right vehicles to be able to do their job well. And I think if you do that and combine it with the real rewards you get from serving the public and stepping forward at the time of crisis, I think that they're all the things that you need to have in place to ensure that retention remains high.
Yeah, thank you for that. There are some officers that are not available to go out onto the ground for one reason or another. Are you able to quantify that number, and also, perhaps more importantly, how they are employed behind the scenes to release other officers who are fit to deploy onto the ground to do so?
So we have a number of officers on what we term restricted duties at any one time. There's a whole variety of reasons for that. I mean, that can involve things such as pregnancy, it could be involve injury on duty or illness. Sometimes it could involve restrictions that are in place because of misconduct allegation is being investigated. We have a banding structure for our restricted officers. So some of those, an officer could be categorised as restricted if, because of a back injury, they can't wear their body armour, but they can still do the full roles for a police officer if they're in a detective function. And it doesn't mean that they're unavailable to us. A number of years ago now, set up a team called Operation Solve. Operation Solve carry out predominantly desk-based investigations, and the majority of staff who work in that team are restricted officers, so that we and the public are getting full value from them, and so that the officers themselves still feel that they're able to come in and make a contribution. The productivity review that I mentioned earlier, we think will be published later in October, will make recommendations to police forces that they make better use of the officers that are on restricted duties. I'm convinced that we make absolutely full use of them. Such is the level of oversight. There's not a police officer in this force whose restrictions we're not clear on and is not deployed into meaningful activity.
Good. Mindful of the time, we'll just finish this item and then we'll break at that point. Just looking at page 6, table 8, which is the table on engagement, which suggested that there's no engagement with businesses. Now that surprised me, because certainly when I had a meeting with businesses on Friday, they were very clear that there was quite a lot of engagement. So my impression is there's actually significant engagement with business about retail crime. I just wondered if you could comment on what's going on there.
Yes, there is significant engagement at all levels. Our beat managers will frequently visit businesses in their neighbourhoods as part of their regular engagement activity. In the city centres, we have bespoke retail beat managers who are involved in engagement with the retail communities. And of course, you'll be aware of our rural beat managers who their businesses are farmers and agricultural engineers, etc., who they are in frequent engagement with. You'll also be aware that we have a licensing team whose full-time role is pretty much engaging with businesses in nighttime economies across the country. We have a capability called Project Servitor, which operates in Norwich city centre and is frequently deployed into locations such as shopping malls, supporting businesses to deter crime. And then finally, our joint cybercrime units have cybersecurity advisors who, again, spend their time out in businesses advising them how they can protect themselves from cyber criminals. So whilst a lot of business engagement is taking place, it's not being reflected in the engagement app. That's a recording issue because on the app, there's an optional tag where an officer can click business related. And we're not always making sure that is clicked. That's something that we will look at. But for the purposes of reassuring you today, there is good and appropriate engagement with our businesses through the means I've set out.
No, that was certainly my impression, so I'm grateful for that. I confused people. I said page 6. It was page 6 of the report on the pillar. It's page 30 in the papers as presented. So forgive the complication there. And my final one is, if you like, the sweep up question. What can we do to improve visibility? I suspect you've covered most of the ground, but is there any sort of magic wand you can wave to answer, if you like, the expectation gap?
I could do with the Treasury and the Home Office waving that magic wand, actually, because so much of it is down to is down to resource. We do have, as you referred to earlier, so many of our new student officers in those first few years of their service who have that heavy training abstraction. Once we move them through that period of their career, I think there'll be a little bit of dividends there for us. We have made some investment in the technologies that can liberate police officers from police stations. Most recently, only in the last month, we've gone live with a new digital asset management product, which makes the collection and assessment of CCTV much easier, quicker, and more streamlined. Our crime recording system is being upgraded in January, which will make the task of putting together case files slicker and quicker. So there are those small incremental gains that we can do. The capital funds to make further investment in technology would help considerably if we were able to obtain that. But myself, with the whole chief officer team are passionate about getting our police officers out of our stations and being visible, because that's where we want to be.
Thank you. Those are all my questions. Any other points from the floor and on the board? Let's end that item and we'll pause there for a comfort break. We're running 6 minutes late, so let's target coming back on time at 11:15, getting back on track. We'll crack on then with item 7. Much.